Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
It's funny how we always talk about what makes a society like really good, a place where everyone kind of gets along, right?
Yeah.
And it turns out that how well little kids, like young children, interact with each other
Okay.
really can tell us something about
Yeah.
how well that society might do later on down the line.
Interesting.
Like whether they're friendly or share,
Wow.
they can actually predict something
Yeah.
about how that society is going to be. It's kind of wild when you think about it.
It really is. It makes you think, like, what are those little things
Yeah,
that really help a kid develop these, like, super important social skills?
exactly. And what if I told you that something as basic as whether a child eats fish could actually play a part in how kind and sociable they become?
Wow, that is a fascinating connection. And that's actually exactly what we're going to be looking at today.
Right. We've got some really interesting new research that looks at this. So for this deep dive, we are looking at a brand new study that just came out this year, 2025. It's in the European Journal of Nutrition. And there's this really cool health news piece that the University of Bristol put out March 11th, 2025.
Very cool.
They both come from this incredible study called the Children of the 90s study,
All right.
which is this huge ongoing health diary for literally thousands of families in the UK. And it's been tracking all sorts of things about these families for decades.
Yeah, that's such a valuable resource for researchers.
It really is amazing. So what we want to do today is kind of dig into what this new research tells us about the connection between how much seafood children eat
Okay.
and something called prosocial behavior.
Prosocial behavior, yeah.
Which is basically all those good things like being friendly and helpful and sharing your toys and comforting people when they're sad.
all the good stuff.
All the good stuff.
Yeah.
We also want to look at like why this link might exist.
Ah,
And of course, what this could mean for you listening out there.
right.
Whether you're a parent, a grandparent, work with kids, or just are interested in how people develop into who they are.
Absolutely.
So let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
When you first looked at this study, what was the thing that really stood out to you, like the main question they were trying to answer?
Well, the big question they were trying to figure out was if there's a connection between the amount of seafood a child eats when they're 7 years old
Okay.
and how they develop, how they grow in two key areas, their thinking skills and their behavior, especially how prosocial they are. And they looked at this from ages 7 to 9.
So like how smart they are and how nice they are.
Pretty much, yeah. But they used fancier terms, of course. For thinking skills, they looked at something called intelligence quotient.
Right.
And for the niceness or the helpfulness, that's what we call prosocial behavior.
Got it. So how on earth did they collect all this information for this study? It sounds huge.
It was a pretty big project. Like you mentioned earlier, they tapped into that amazing resource, the Avon longitudinal study of parents and children.
Oh, right.
That long-term study. And they specifically focused on a group of children. It was a large group, somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000,
Wow.
for whom they had all the details about their seafood intake and all the things they were measuring.
So how do they know what these kids were eating?
Okay, so when the children were 7 years old,
No.
their parents filled out this really detailed questionnaire about how often they ate all different kinds of seafood.
Well, they had to list every single type of fish.
Well, not every single one, but it was pretty comprehensive. They had categories like shellfish, whitefish,
Okay.
both coated and uncoated, so with and without breading,
Oh, interesting.
tuna, and then other fish like salmon and mackerel.
Okay. So they had those like major categories.
Exactly. And using that, the researchers could figure out how much seafood each child ate per week, measured in grams.
So they had a good picture of their diet at age 7.
Yeah, specifically their seafood intake.
Right. Okay. And then what about measuring their behavior and thinking skills?
Yeah.
How do they do that?
So for behavior, they used something called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire. Basically, parents answered questions about their child's behavior.
So it's like a survey for parents to describe their kids.
Yeah, you could think of it like that. And they focused on a specific part of this questionnaire, which is all about prosocial behavior.
Like good stuff.
All that good stuff.
Right.
Things like helping others, being kind and considerate.
And parents filled this out when their kids were 7?
Yes, at age 7,
Okay.
and then again at age 9.
Got it. So they could see how things change over time. What about the thinking skills, like that intelligence quotient stuff?
Right. So for that, they used a shorter version of a test called the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children. It's a well-known test, been around for a while, but they used a shorter version. And this was done when the kids were 8.
Okay.
And this test gives scores for different areas like verbal skills, performance skills, and then also an overall intelligence quotient score.
Okay, so they have all this data. Seafood at 7, behavior at 7 and 9,
Yeah.
intelligence quotient at 8. What do they do with all that?
Well, they had to analyze it all, right? See if there are any connections. So they used a statistical method called adjusted logistic regression. It sounds complicated,
It's a
but
thing.
basically it's a way to see if the amount of seafood the kids ate was related to the likelihood of them having low scores on behavior or intelligence quotient.
Okay.
But the really cool thing is, they didn't just look at this in isolation, they also took into account a whole bunch of other factors that could affect a child's behavior.
Like what kind of things?
Like basic things like whether the child was a boy or a girl,
Uh-huh.
their mother's education level, whether their mother smoked or drank alcohol during pregnancy, how much seafood mom ate during pregnancy,
Interesting.
and any difficult things the family might have gone through.
Really trying to control for all those different things.
Exactly. It's all about isolating the potential impact of the seafood.
So after all that work, what did they find? What's the big takeaway?
All right, so this is where it gets interesting. They found a clear link between kids who ate less seafood at age 7 and having a higher chance of scoring lower on those prosocial behavior tests, both at age 7 and 9.
So the less fish they ate, the less likely they were to be kind and helpful.
Yeah, that's kind of what it suggests. Specifically, children who ate no seafood at all had a much higher chance of having poor prosocial behavior compared to those who ate at least 190 grams a week.
How much higher of a chance?
At age 7, it was a 35% increase, and at age 9, it was a 43% increase.
That's significant.
It is. They also saw a sort of stepwise trend. So generally, the more seafood kids ate, the better their prosocial behavior tended to be.
So eating fish might actually help kids be nicer.
Well, it suggests there might be a relationship there. However, they did not find any statistically significant link between seafood intake at age 7 and their intelligence quotient scores at age 8.
Well, that's interesting. So fish might be good for social skills, but not necessarily for overall smarts, at least based on this study.
That's what it seems to suggest, yeah.
Why is all this prosocial behavior stuff so important anyway?
Well, think about it. Prosocial behavior is all about benefiting other people. You know, being friendly, helping out, sharing, showing kindness and empathy.
Right.
These are really, really important skills for a society to function well.
Makes sense.
I mean, strong communities and positive relationships depend on people being able to cooperate and care for each other. And these social skills really start developing early, like between 1 and 2 years old.
Wow, so young.
Yeah, and then they get more and more complex as kids grow up.
So it's kind of like a foundation for how we relate to each other as adults.
You could say that. And what's really cool about this study
Yeah.
is it suggests that diet, something we can actually control, might play a role in helping kids develop these essential qualities.
That's huge.
Yeah.
We can actually do something about this.
Right, exactly. Diet is a modifiable factor. We can make choices about what our kids eat. And this research suggests that putting seafood on the menu could have benefits beyond physical health.
So it's not just about omega-3 fatty acids and brain development, but also social and emotional growth.
Precisely. It could potentially help them learn how to get along with others better.
I remember reading in that health news article that a lot of the kids in the study weren't eating much fish at all.
That's right. The average amount of seafood eaten by these kids was pretty low, especially when you compare it to what the UK's National Health Service recommends.
What do they recommend?
They say at least 2 portions of fish a week, and one of those should be an oily fish, like salmon or mackerel.
And most of these kids weren't hitting that target.
Pretty much none of them were meeting those guidelines.
That is surprising. Why do you think they're eating so little fish?
There are probably a few reasons for that. The news article mentioned that there have been warnings in the past about eating too much fish, because of pollutants like mercury, and that can be super confusing for parents.
Yeah, when you hear conflicting messages, it's hard to know what to do.
Exactly. It might make them a bit cautious and limit how much fish they give their kids.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So for those listening who are parents, grandparents, or care for kids, what's the main thing they should take away from all this?
Well, I think the key takeaway is this. This research provides more evidence that including fish in children's diets could be really beneficial for their social and emotional development.
More than we might have thought.
Exactly. It seems like it's not just about general brain development. It's specifically linked to developing those prosocial behaviors, kindness, getting along with others.
Right.
And while this particular study didn't find a clear link with intelligence quotient,
Right.
the connection to social skills is definitely something to consider.
It definitely is. Now, like any research, there are some things we need to keep in mind when we're looking at these findings. What are some limitations of this study? What doesn't it tell us for sure?
That's a great question, and it's so important to consider these limitations. First off, it's really important to remember that this was an observational study.
What does that mean?
It means that while it can show us that two things are linked, like in this case, how much seafood kids ate and their prosocial behavior,
Okay.
it can't definitively prove that one causes the other.
Oh, I see.
So we can see a connection, but we can't say for sure that eating fish directly makes kids nicer. There could be other things going on that weren't measured or fully accounted for.
So there might be other things that influence both what kids eat and how they behave socially.
Exactly. And even though the researchers tried to adjust for a lot of factors like family background and social stuff, there's always a chance that something else could be influencing the results.
And there's always the possibility that they didn't measure something perfectly.
Yeah, that's always a possibility in any study.
What else should we be aware of?
Another thing is that the children who participated in this study, the ones with complete data, they tended to come from more affluent families, higher income and education levels.
Okay.
So that means the findings might not apply to all groups of people equally. Those with different social or economic circumstances might have different experiences.
So it's not necessarily generalizable to everyone.
Exactly.
What about the amount of fish the kids were eating? Did that affect the results?
Yeah, actually. Remember how we said the average seafood intake was quite low?
Yeah.
Well, that could actually limit the conclusions we can draw. If more kids had been eating the recommended amounts, the findings might have been different.
We might have seen a stronger effect.
Exactly.
And you mentioned that the intelligence quotient test was a shorter version.
Right.
Could that have made a difference?
It's possible. While the shorter version is still a reliable measure, it might not be as good as the full test at detecting those really subtle differences in cognitive abilities.
Okay.
So it's just something to keep in mind.
And one last thing. The study looked at total seafood intake. Did they analyze specific types of fish or the nutrients in them?
That's a great point. They did look at DHA.
What's DHA?
It stands for docosahexaenoic acid. It's a type of omega-3 fatty acid that's found in fish.
Okay.
They looked at how DHA intake was related to prosocial behavior at age 9, and they found a weak connection.
Interesting.
So this suggests that further research should really dig into whether certain nutrients within seafood are more strongly linked to these developmental outcomes.
So there's still a lot more to learn about the specifics.
Absolutely.
So the findings about prosocial behavior are definitely interesting.
Right.
But there's still a lot more we need to figure out. What did the experts involved in this research have to say about what they found?
Well, the news article quoted Dr. Caroline Taylor, who is an associate professor in nutrition at the University of Bristol and one of the researchers on the study.
Okay.
And she basically said that their findings are pretty clear evidence that links how much fish kids eat with their behavioral development.
Makes sense.
Based on that, she strongly recommends that parents make sure their children are eating at least 2 portions of fish each week.
Which is what the NHS recommends.
Exactly. It aligns perfectly with that.
That's pretty straightforward advice. What did the researchers say in their actual scientific paper?
Well, in the introduction to their paper, they talk about a report from 2023 by the Food and Agricultural Organization and the World Health Organization.
Okay.
And this report basically acknowledges that eating fish is beneficial throughout life, including childhood.
Makes sense.
But they also stress that it's important to think about local context when it comes to fish consumption.
What does that mean, local context?
It means considering things like how much fish people in a specific area usually eat, the levels of contaminants that might be present in the local fish,
Oh, right.
the general nutritional health of that population, and even cultural food habits.
So it's not as simple as just saying everyone should eat more fish.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of recommendation. You have to take those local factors into account.
That's interesting.
And in their conclusion, they call for more research to look at the connection between seafood and a wider range of developmental indicators, how children's brains and nervous systems develop.
Okay.
They believe this will give us stronger evidence for the role of seafood in things like cognitive development.
So they're saying that more research is needed, but they're definitely onto something.
Right, they're seeing some interesting connections.
So this has been a really fascinating look at this new research.
It really has.
As we wrap up, what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember?
I'd say the key point is this. This new study adds to the evidence that suggests that eating fish could have important benefits for children's social and emotional development.
Right.
Particularly when it comes to those prosocial behaviors we've been talking about. Kindness, getting along with others, things like that. While this study didn't find a direct link with intelligence quotient, the connection to how children interact with each other is definitely something to think about.
It makes you think about what you're feeding your kids.
For sure.
So what can our listeners do with this information?
Well, I think a good first step is to consider your own or your children's fish consumption. Are you meeting those recommended guidelines? If not, maybe explore some reliable sources of information. The National Health Service is a good one, or your local health authorities.
And they can help you understand how much and what types of fish are safe and beneficial for children to eat.
Absolutely.
And to leave you with a final thought, given what we've learned about this possible link between seafood and being kind, how can we, both as families and as a society, do a better job of making sure kids have access to a balanced diet with enough seafood?
That's a great question.
Maybe it's not just about physical health, but also about helping them develop the capacity for kindness and connection.
That's a really important idea to consider.
And for those who want to learn even more about this, you can check out the original research in the European Journal of Nutrition. The University of Bristol news article has the digital object identifier, which will help you find the study.
It's worth reading and thinking about the bigger implications for diet and child development and for the recommendations we give to parents and caregivers.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive,
It's been a pleasure.
and we'll see you next time.
See you then.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.